and he always taught me that you need to have a history of the critters. You have to understand what makes the critters work and think and do. Because if you can ever get yourself between the critters and, once again, the criminal element, then you're in the game. Mm-hmm. If you don't know what the critters are going to do, it's really hard to get in the game because you need both to be in the game. I mean, handcuff, badge, firearm, extra mags. You know, you find it sometimes in boxes that you open up for shoes or something, those little packets for, okay. Turned out to be drugs.
Oh.
So, yeah, I mean, you just never know what you're going to get into. There were shipments that we would pop open, and they would be various decorations and things, and there'd be a human skull all decorated up.
Delta Waterfowl is the duck hunters organization, and what we're doing is managing out here to increase duck production.
The Voice of the Duck Hunter, a podcast presented by Delta Waterfowl. Brought to you by Rig'em Right and Lucky Duck.
Welcome back to Delta Waterfowl's The Voice of the Duck Hunter podcast. I'm your host, Joel Brice. Today we're joined by a courageous champion for wildlife, Rich Grosz, a retired U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service special agent. Rich spent his career holding the thin green line, fighting, sometimes literally, to protect ducks, geese, and other wildlife while investigating everything from illegal eagle feather trafficking to heaping way over the limit piles of ducks. His passion for protecting wildlife began as a young boy while riding along with his father, the late legendary game warden Terry Grosz, despite often being told to stay in the truck. As a lifelong, passionate waterfowl hunter himself, Rich brings refreshing perspectives on the relationship between hunters and wildlife officers, and how together that partnership can give wildlife a voice. I think you'll be inspired by his motivations, his integrity, and his lifelong fight to protect wildlife and natural resources, a passion that burns to this day. So without further ado, enjoy part one of this two-part conversation. Rich Grosz, welcome to the Delta Waterfowl podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Well, it's a pleasure. Known you for, I don't know, I want to say 10 years maybe?
It's probably a little more than that.
Is it more than that already?
Yep.
Jeez.
Time flies.
Yeah. You've been on, you're a repeat guest.
Correct.
You, me, and Pat Bosco.
Yep.
I'm just gonna, if Pat hears you're on this podcast, I think he might listen to this one.
I guarantee he will.
So, hi, Pat. So, good dude. That was a good podcast. We'll talk a little bit about our Duck ID guide somewhere through this podcast, but that was a big part of the conversation then, I think, right?
It was the majority of it.
Yeah.
It was a pretty big undertaking for both Pat and myself, and obviously Delta. So that was a lot of work.
Yeah. Well, for the listener, I know you already listened to an introduction here, but Rich Grosz is a retired federal wildlife officer, special agent?
Special agent.
That's cool. Do you have a tattoo, special agent, somewhere?
No, I don't. I've passed that time in my life when tattoos and everything were the thing. So no, I don't. The official title was criminal investigator, but the street title is basically a special agent.
Okay. Well, basically this podcast is going to be about you, your upbringing, your career, and we're going to get into, the fun of it, the fear of it, we're going to get emotional about I'll cry if you want to cry, but what I mean by that is, like, this wasn't just a career for you, right? And I'm careful about using the word calling, but I'm going to use that. I think that, from the time that I've known you and the conversations we've had, it's like this was not just a career. This was a big part of your life, right?
You use the word calling, I'll use the word vision quest.
Okay.
For me, it's the only thing I could ever see myself doing. I attribute most of that to my father, and I'm sure he'll come up throughout this podcast, but he was the absolute foundation as to why I pursued the career that I did.
I just want kind of maybe a little courtesy, although I'm doing it on air, so it's not. It's like a backhanded courtesy. Is it okay to talk openly about your dad?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. You can mention the old boy's name, Terry Grosz. Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. I just wanted to make sure that before we wandered down that path, that make sure I wasn't uncovering a. Well, he's no longer on this earth, so
he's no longer with us. I think God decided he needed a game warden upstairs. Things were probably getting out of hand, so he decided to punch Dad's ticket, and so Dad's in a better place. But yeah, Dad was the reason why, probably with 100%, Dad's the reason why I went down this field.
Okay.
If you look at it historically, Dad came on with a Cal Fish and Game. They've changed their department name now, but at the time it was Cal Fish and Game as a state warden. He was initially employed up in Humboldt County, Del Norte County, basically Northern California, not far from the Oregon border, on the coast. And from there he got transferred to Colusa, which is the Central Valley. It's the north portion of the Central Valley of California. Duck Mecca, one of the many duck meccas that the United States has. I was too young when he initially came on with Cal Fish and Game. That was in the mid-'60s. I was born in the mid-'60s. But Dad got transferred down to the Central Valley as Cal Fish and Game. He then came across as a Fed with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. He was a game management agent at the time. And it was there that my earliest memories and recollections started.
in California.
In California.
Okay.
Yes. Dad, well, game management agents, just like the name sounds, they were federal game wardens. And they obviously had an international component because of the Migratory Bird Treaty Act and a few of the laws that they enforced back then. But ducks were very high priority for the agency at the time. And Dad was, like I said before, right in the duck mecca. So he worked a lot of duck hunters. He was gone. It was a vision quest for Dad, too. It wasn't a job. It was something that he woke up in the morning and his mind was already into the job, into the career, figuring out where he's going to go, what he was going to do. And Dad was a person that really never played checkers. He played chess. And what I mean by that was the things that he thought about and the things that he did were not just one-dimensional. They were multidimensional. He was trying to get 2 or 3 steps ahead of the people that he was pursuing. And he was very, very proficient at it. And he had a work ethic and a drive that was second to none. So when you have somebody who has a master's degree in wildlife management, who was born and raised hunting and fishing and probably doing some things he shouldn't have as a rural kid, doing some penance for that too, I suppose, taking the state badge and then later the federal badge to pursue that endeavor to try to get in between the criminal element and the critters, he was very good at it. And he was a workaholic. And so as a young kid living in rural California, if I wanted to spend time with Dad, most of that time had to come in the form of riding shotgun when he was a game warden or later on a game management agent. It was okay to do so back then. You can't do it today because of liability reasons, but I spent more hours than I can count riding shotgun with Dad. And it allowed me to see things and experience things that I could not have experienced or could have seen any other way. And when you ride with and spend time with anybody, I don't care if it's your worst enemy or your best friend or your father, when you spend those kind of hours together, you learn. I mean, there's things that are going on, you don't even pick it up. And you know, they always say the best time to teach a child a second language is when they're a child.
Sure.
Because they just absorb it. They don't even realize it. They're just absorbing it. Well, the best time to teach Rich how to become a game warden was as a kid, because I was just absorbing. And it intrigued me at a very, very early age. And not to take over this podcast by me talking the whole time, but
You are the guest.
well, I realize that, but and I'm thankful to be your guest. But there were several moments that are still in my mind, like this happened yesterday or this morning, that as a kid really got my attention. I can remember going with Dad, and Dad oftentimes worked nights too. He'd work during the days, and then he'd go and position himself when the nights were just right. You know, typically on a full moon night, when the moon would be really bright, you could almost read a newspaper by it. During the waterfowl season, he'd go and get himself positioned in a field where birds would be feeding into the field. A lot of the commercial hunting, the market hunting days, were dying out by the time Dad got in. There was still some going on, stuff going to San Francisco, and you know, where you kill a large number of birds illegally, and they get shipped to San Francisco or LA, and then they'd be sold as duck dinners and things of that nature. That was on the very tail end of the beginning of his career, but the tail end of commercial market gunning. But what was still in vogue and still happening in these rural communities were freezer drags, is what they used to call them. And a freezer drag was, you'd have a family, and they would take advantage of these birds coming into a rice field typically. And it was the same mechanics. You basically get ahead of the birds, usually on a full moon night, because you can see them and they're more active. You get ahead of them, usually in a ditch or something like that, an embankment. They're feeding and they're hopping each other, trying to get more food. And when they get close, you whistle or something like that. They all stick their heads up, and then you just go to town on them as fast as you can go. Yourself or you and a bunch of buddies unplug shotguns. And obviously you're cutting swaths of these ducks or geese, but typically ducks. You cut large swaths out when you do that. The birds are concentrated. They're all trying to get up. But when they're feeding, they're so tightly condensed that they have to wait for each other to get up, because you can't get up if you're so tight you can't even spread your wings. So lots of death, lots of cripples. And with all that gunning going on, and you're the criminal element here, the first thing you want to do is get your stuff and get out of there, because obviously game wardens are going to be coming to that sound in the middle of the night. What else could it be? So Dad would work in the evenings, and he would try to position himself many times to be in those fields, or to be in positions where he could see the vehicles coming in, or they might come up ditches, you know, all this kind of stuff. But he'd try to get himself in between the birds and the criminal element. Freezer drag. What I mean by that is they weren't selling them. They would fill their freezers with them. So they had a protein source, a meat source, and they may give some to neighbors and other family and stuff like that, but you're knocking down a lot of birds. And it's not a legal method to take either. But as a kid, you can't be everywhere at once. Dad would always tell me that, so you pick your best option and you hope that you hit it right. Well, he may be on one side of the county and we'd be patrolling the other side of the county during the day, and you could see the remnants of a freezer drag when you came up to a farmer's field, and you'd still have cripples. You'd have dead birds all over the place. You'd have cripples in the weeds. I mean, it was just a mess. I, as a kid, had a chance to see a couple of those. it bothered me. It bothered me greatly. And little things like that, I shouldn't say little, things like that, quickly took a kid who was into his BB gun and his fish pole and his wrist rocket and his black lab pup. It quickly kind of turned my direction, my compass into, all right, this is not right. I got to stop this too. You can't do it as a kid. Well, I think Dad saw that. I don't think that was necessarily the intention of Dad when he took me out. But I think he recognized pretty early on that I recognized this was not right and I wanted to do something about it. And so off the ship went.
Lucky Duck is a proud partner of Delta Waterfowl. While being an industry leader in waterfowl motion decoys is their focus, they have the hunter in mind when designing all of their products. From their 5-star crash-rated Lucky Duck kennel to their full line of predator hunting gear, they are committed to serving the hunter 365 days a year. Check out their wonderful line of products at www.luckyduck.com or at a local retailer near you. So do you feel like he kind of saw that and then nurtured it? Saw that you had something like him?
Well, I think that was a long suit of his. He knew the critters, and he always taught me that you need to have a history of the critters. You have to understand what makes the critters work and think and do. Because if you can ever get yourself between the critters and, once again, the criminal element, then you're in the game. If you can't, if you don't know what the critters are going to do, it's really hard to get in the game because you need both to be in the game. So I think he saw that it concerned me. I asked a lot of questions, and if a kid asks a lot of questions, having now been a parent myself and now a grandfather myself, when the kids are asking a lot of questions, you start to piece it together. There's some interest here.
Yeah.
And it's a healthy interest, so what do you do as a parent? You feed the fire. And that's what Dad did in retrospect. Didn't see it then. I see it now.
I have a couple questions because I think we're gonna move past this without really the opportunity to come back. Was there where did hunting and fishing fit into your life? I mean, your dad was a busy man, right? Committed to the job. When were you able to go hunt and fish? Where did that fit into your family life?
Dad loved to hunt, and Dad loved to wet a line. He did not get much of an opportunity to do so. So when he did, I was along. He might say at that age it was fishing, not hunting. But I've always been someone who's been intrigued by the out of doors. I've always been intrigued by the complexity and how things rely on each other in the out of doors and how critters react to things. Hunting with Dad happened as a child or as a very young kid, not very often. We'd go shoot. Dad reloaded. And so, in fact, in Colusa, California, he had a big berm put in the backyard so he could practice pistol shooting. And we'd reload all day. And, so I learned how to shoot at a very early age. I've always been intrigued with the out of doors, and I've always loved pursuing, hunting, if you will. Be it a fish, be it a duck, be it a deer, or later on, once I became an adult, be it a human. I've always enjoyed the pursuit. I didn't have a whole lot of chances to hunt and fish as a kid because Dad did work. As I got older, we had a few chances in North Dakota when we lived here in the early to mid 70s. That's where I killed my first ducks, my first geese, my first grouse with Mom's 20 gauge using lead to show you how old I am. And it was legal. But when I finally had a chance to pull the trigger at a critter, that was huge. I mean, that was another drug of my life that I had to have. So It never stopped. As I got a little bit older, sometimes the neighbors would take me because Dad was busy.
Oh, sure.
And then as I continued to get into college, and at college I basically had nothing because I was either working or going to college or playing basketball. But as I got older, I just continually pursued it. Dad was big into big game. He used to hunt a little bit in California, not to jump back and forth so much, but he would hunt in California as a game warden. He had one or two farmers that had land that were on the right side of the law, and they would allow him on. And so, he might go in an afternoon and hunt for 2 hours or something before bringing home the birds and then going back to work and hunting or working some more as a game warden. But hunting was kind of just bits and pieces that I could pull together. I knew I loved it. I knew I wanted more of it. And usually once I get a head of steam up for something, it's full pursuit. I mean, that's just kind of my MO.
So you grew up in California? I know this is kind of like a military child. Where did I actually grow up? Where do you identify your childhood geographically?
Wherever my family was. Not to give you an off answer. But you're right. I wasn't a military brat, but I was a government brat. Mm-hmm. Dad climbed the ranks, so we moved every 2.5 years.
Oh, wow.
Colusa, California, was where I started to was where I have my first remembrances as a kid. From there, we moved to Bismarck in the mid-'70s. Things happened here because I could still ride with Dad, and I still had experiences. Some of them are even in his books that he wrote before he passed away. And then from there, it was into Virginia, and then into Minnesota, and then into Denver before he retired. And obviously, I took off and did my own thing as an adult. So we moved around a lot. It gave me a chance to experience other cultures, other foods. As you can tell, I'm a person that likes to eat. So I always enjoyed that. Dad was a big history buff. I enjoy history too. So, we had a lot of long suits that we enjoyed together.
Okay. We have to take, we're going to take a little tangent here. You kind of gave me the intro. You're obviously not uncomfortable talking about your physical stature because you'll joke that you're the runt.
Yes.
You're the runt of your family.
Yes, the men.
Of the men.
Yes.
So to, I guess, paint the picture for those that are listening to this conversation, 6'4", 6'5", 6'7". 6'7"?
Yes.
All right, I'm going to see if I can make you blush. I told this story. I said, I hate shaking your hand because, what? I don't want you to get hurt feelings. I don't really hate shaking your hand, but what I hate about it is the very first time I shook your hand, and I've always had a firm handshake, but I reached in there casually, like expecting it was going to be routine, and I couldn't get my hand around your hand, and you crushed me, and I felt like such a child. And so now every time when I shake your hand, I just really make sure that, like, between our thumbs and forefingers, just get in there so I can grip you. And today, I didn't do a very good job, but you didn't crush me this time.
Well, I'm not the man that I once was in retirement. I'm putting a few years on, but I'm just a normal-sized guy.
That's crap. That's no cussing, but I can say crap. That's crap. And you said, so 6'7", 2 something. You said you're the runt of the boys. How you're?
Dad was about 6'5", 320, 330. Chris, my younger brother, God rest his soul too, he was shorter. He was about 6 foot, and he was every bit of 320, 330. But out of the 3 boys in the family, Chris was the strongest, bar none. That kid could lift a house off its foundation, and it was all natural. He was Brahma bull strong. And any of the family friends, including Pat Bosco, if he's listening, he would attest to it. I mean, there was no messing with Chris. You couldn't hurt the guy. So, yeah, I was the runt.
Well, you were made for this job, born into the job, kind of, although you could have gone any path, and you almost did, kind of, maybe. But then also, yeah, just with kind of your stature, I do remember you're kind of an imposing figure. Back and when you were full-time employed as an agent, go around with a firearm, right?
It's part of the stuff that you have. I mean, handcuff, badge, firearm, extra mags.
Yeah.
I mean, we're not a uniformed. The Fish and Wildlife Service special agents are not uniformed. We're plain clothes. You know, at trial you're in suits and everything else, and other than at trial you're just dressing for either regular business attire or whatever. So
Blend in
you
for
blend
a lot
in.
of the time.
Yeah, you try not to be obvious.
Yeah. Rig'em Right is an industry leader in high-quality waterfowl gear and proud partner of Delta Waterfowl. From blind bags, backpacks, and gun cases to dog vests, dog stands, and dog blinds, Rig'em Right has you and your hunting dog covered for long days in the duck marsh. And even more exciting, Rig'em Right has launched its new mainline series decoys that are lightweight, durable, and they look awesome. Check out Rig'em Right's complete lineup at www.rig'emright.com or wherever you buy your hunting gear. So, I mean, let's talk about that for a second, because you must have been an athlete growing up.
I was.
Yeah.
I was.
Because there was a moment you tried out for the Denver Nuggets?
No.
Or something like that?
Coming out of college, I went to a Division II college for basketball in Denver. Coming out, I had the opportunity to try out for the Nuggets and for the Broncos. Did not do it. I was focused on getting my master's degree, and once again, with Dad's guidance, encouragement, suggestions, whatever term you want to use, I was trying to make myself the most competitive person that I could be to get on as a special agent.
Right.
So I let that go, and I just honed my focus even further on becoming a special agent.
I didn't play college sports, but I was really tempted to do that. But I felt a similar pressure there, and you're a little bit ahead of me. You're 59, I'm 51, but I remember feeling such pressure. Difficult field to crack, wildlife conservation. I don't know how wildlife law enforcement was, but for me, I remember, a lot of the talk was you'd better love wildlife management, because two things, it's a hard job to get. You're probably going to have to move quite a bit before you settle into the one, and don't choose this career if you're looking to be rich or make a lot of money. And I remember that. I wanted it so bad. I never hesitated. There's nothing else that I've ever wanted to do with my life. But I did see college athletics. I had a couple upperclassmen in high school that went off and played sports, and they didn't hunt for their entire career, or their entire college career. And I'm like, geez, I don't think I like that. But the other thing, too, is I made all my jobs support my resume. And as an athlete, you don't have time for that kind of stuff. So I thought, I just need to do that. So no, I different level, but I get that calling there for sure. So I think I'm going to forget about this one. You said something that I do want to back up a little bit. Market hunting. To me, that was just something I read in a textbook. But growing up in Wisconsin, I'm sure there was maybe some of that going on there too. But so these were illegal market hunting operations, obviously, in the 60s and 70s. That was already unlawful. Is that right?
Yeah, market hunting, if you go back to some of the history of why the Migratory Bird Treaty Act came into being, part of it was the plume hunters, for the women's hats and things of that nature. But another component, another leg to this table, if you will, was market hunting. And so the Migratory Bird Treaty Act's 1916, and this stuff was going on before that, where birds could be killed in the spring, birds could be killed in the fall, methods of take varied, and a lot of the regulations, if there were regulations, pre-Migratory Bird Treaty Act, were state regulations. There's enough of a national outcry because of populations of birds just being decimated. Some extinctions of birds that we know, like the Carolina parakeet, the passenger pigeon. I mean, we all know these stories. But market hunting was also one of them. And duck numbers were going down precipitously. Also coincided with the Dust Bowl. I mean, I won't get into all this history stuff, but market hunting was the killing of ducks or geese in large numbers, and they would typically be shipped off to the major metropolitan areas, the Twin Cities, Chicago, San Francisco, New York, where you'd have duck dinners for the wealthy, the ones that could actually afford that. So there was a financial transaction involved. All of that is highly illegal today. When Dad came in, and that's in the 60s, the mid-60s, that was on its very edge and coming down. I mean, it was rare. He still got into some of that. That's just because he worked his tail end off at it, and he had informants and everything else that helped him. The thing that was more common were the freezer drags.
Okay.
Back in those days. And the market gunning today is probably truly a thing of the past. It doesn't make sense with how we can raise waterfowl, and now you don't have shot, in the breast or the back and, everything else. But the sale of waterfowl today under those types of scenarios, it's pretty much non-existent.
Okay. Yeah. I just kind of, it just fascinated me in that, I do think I think we tend to overestimate the duration of our life in terms of like human civilization. So to go back into the 60s or 70s, I would suggest that most people think of just kind of the fading end of market hunting was back in the early 1900s. But no, it continued on, became more undercover as the decades went on, and thankfully not in existence anymore. But
yeah, we don't have the scope and the scale. I mean, is there in my career? Was there an Asian restaurant or two that might be receiving ducks out of the back door that they're cutting up and using as a meat product in their buffets? Or absolutely, there were things like that probably still are going on. It's not prevalent. It would be the exception to the rule. But there's still those smaller issues like that. But the days of the old market gunning, no, that's come and gone.
Okay. No, thank you for that. That was just kind of a surprise little nugget for me. And I think backing up, and I don't want to say we'll close the book on your dad, but he was an accomplished author, over 20 books, and the one that I think I've heard, and I think he gave you a copy to give to me back when we were working on the Duck ID book, I believe. I have a copy. He was still alive when we were working on that. Had to be, right?
He was.
Yeah, so I have that book, but that's, what is it, Wildlife Wars? Is that what it's called?
Yes. Wildlife Wars was Dad's first book. It received national attention. And for those that are listening to this podcast, it's a book that has a series of short stories in it. So it could be anywhere from 10 to 20-ish pages long. It covers his time as both a state game warden as well as a federal agent, a special agent. And he's got several of these books. Barnes & Noble sells them, not to necessarily plug it, but the nice thing is that the royalties go to St. Jude's. So
nice.
It's a win-win. When Dad was alive, he used to tell me that sometimes he would get in trouble because predominantly men would buy this, not exclusively, but predominantly men would buy this. And so husbands might be in bed or sitting in the living room or family room reading the book, and they wouldn't come to bed because they get so involved in the book. And the wives would actually give Dad grief over that. or they'd be laughing in bed or something like that when the wife is trying to sleep. So I would highly encourage people that like to have a truthful, factual, but fun short story about some of the weird things Dad got himself into. Start with Wildlife Wars, and there's more of them. If you like it, go get a second book. He's got quite a few of them.
That's cool. That's cool. Let's unbox your career. So you go through college, you have a master's degree. That's new information for me. I tend to think that I don't tend to think wildlife law enforcement as a job that requires a master's degree, where in the other tracks, at least there was a big period of time where you better go on and get 1 or 2 advanced degrees. So I was, you're a smart dude. Don't read into it. But I just didn't think that was a trend that many in law enforcement went, or wasn't it?
No, it's probably an exception to the rule. I got my master's degree at Humboldt State. It's in wildlife management. I'm not aware of a whole lot of other agents that have master's degrees. There are a number of agents, not all by any measure. There are a number of agents that may have a law degree, which is more of an advanced degree, obviously. But once again, I wanted to trying to get to where I needed to be, which was a special agent. The competition is extremely fierce. My class that I was lucky enough to be chosen for, our class size was 9. And so that tied the second smallest. Most class sizes are 15, 20, 25. I had a class size of 9. And so you've got national competition. And if I remember correctly, there are about 4,500 applications for 9 positions. So when you stop to think about that, that's stiff competition. And it's from all walks of life. So I didn't want to get this position by chance, because there's lots of agents that have to apply 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5 times before they finally get on, and there's probably a lot of them that never make it and pursue another job. I wanted to have the ability to, on my own feet, on my own merit, compete with the best. And so the master's degree gave me a few more points. When you're accumulating points with, back then it was an SF 171, which is the government application that doesn't exist anymore today. It gave me a few more points. It's just like I used to work on various refuges over the summer. So I'd go to college, and then during the summer breaks, I spent a year at Arrowwood National Wildlife Refuge. A summer. I spent a summer at Tule Lake. I spent 2 summers at Charles Marion Russell CMR in Montana with refuges. It was done purposefully so that I could show my employer that this is my focus. I've got a criminal justice degree as an undergrad, and then I've got a wildlife management degree as a master's. During the summers, I'm working at refuges, doing everything and anything they ask me to do. You try to hone yourself as much as you can to get the position.
That's commitment. That's for sure. So you get your first real job. If I understand it right, you were a wildlife inspector in L.A.?
Port of Los Angeles and Long Beach Harbor. Yep.
Okay, first question. Do those jobs still exist?
Oh yeah, so absolutely. They're vital. They're vital to the mission.
What are they? What is that job?
There's a couple of badges that the Fish and Wildlife Service has. The one that you just mentioned is the wildlife inspector position. They are inspectors of all the wildlife coming and going to and from the country. So they're doing a lot of international stuff. And that's why it was at Los Angeles and Long Beach. Because you get the shipping containers coming in on the boats, and then you get the personal traffic and the air traffic coming in, and Los Angeles is a very, very, very busy port. Stuff is coming and going 24/7, 365. It's mind-boggling, and it's everything from live, dead parts, products, derivatives of wildlife. It all counts. We'd do some days we'd be doing a pet trade, or we'd be doing trophy shipments, or coral would come in, or live fish would come in, or back then you could actually have wild birds come in before the Wild Bird Conservation Act. I mean, that shows you my age, obviously, but you name it. Leather would come in, leather products, purses, coats, belts, butterflies, snails, you name it, it came in. And so our inspectors have to be experts at knowing the laws not only of the United States, but then knowing the laws of all these other countries. Because if they violated a country, let's just say Australia, something leaves Australia and it gets here to the United States and it's in violation of Australia's law, we can pick it up depending on what it is under the Lacey Act, the Endangered Species Act, under CITES. There's all these other federal laws that we have where we can assist and help other countries if stuff leaves their country illegally. So the inspectors play a huge part. They're a frontline defense for the critters. Agents also do that. They get into commercialization. They get into smuggling, large smuggling type things.
So you were at a major port of entry.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe a special agent is involved once it came in other locations, other means, or somehow made it through, right? So then they're roaming around the country, and that's maybe where a special agent becomes involved?
Or we pick it up right at the border, be it coming in from the Mexico border, or coming in through Lufthansa or something off an airplane, or coming in off of a cargo ship. We get it right at the border if we can. But then it depends, because sometimes you need, and this is the agent's job, not so much the inspector's job, but it depends on how it's coming in, and is it a one-off? Is it something that you've got a smuggling ring and you need to start working that in different means? It really is amazing, and it's mind-boggling, and I didn't see this one coming. When I left Humboldt, I went down to L.A. during the Rodney King riots, so that shows you my age once again. I went down there, and I'm a country bumpkin. I like dirt between my toes, not asphalt and concrete. But this was my way to get on with the Fish and Wildlife Service. Once again, my ultimate destination as a special agent. I got down there, and I am in this sea of humanity. Uncomfortable for me. But I had a job to do. And I was nervous getting there to do this job. When I left, when I got another job with refuges later on in my career, looking back as I was driving out of the Grapevine headed to Colorado, I realized that was probably one of the best jobs I've ever had. It was birth by fire.
Mm-hmm.
You got just immersed into the world's wildlife. You got immersed into a number of federal wildlife laws. You got immersed into other countries' laws. There was so much going on. I worked overtime until even the SAC, who is in charge of the region for the Fish and Wildlife Service Division of Law Enforcement that agents and inspectors are housed in, Dave McMullen, tremendous SAC. I really enjoyed him. He called me and said, "Rich, you going home?" And I said, "Yeah, Dave, I'm going home." I get my uniform, because they're a uniform division, get my uniform washed up, get a bite to eat, and I get back out and get to work. Because I was working so much overtime. It's not a punch in at 8 and punch out at 5 job. It's, like I said, 24/7, 365. You have stuff coming and going every minute of every day, Christmas, holidays, it doesn't matter. It's coming. And the inspectors, and I don't remember how many we had, 10 or so maybe, give or take. Going full bore, maybe 10% is what we had a chance to look at, physically look at. It's immense. And that, you look at some of the other designated ports like New York and Chicago and Miami. It boggles the mind, Joel, how much wildlife is coming into this country and how much wildlife is leaving this country.
Oh, I suppose.
The world wildlife trade is burning like a 3-alarm fire.
Still, right now.
Oh, yeah. Legal. I mean, there's a lot of legal. I'm not saying it's illegal. There is illegal stuff going on, trust me. But, yeah, both legal and illegal, it is huge. It's more than you can possibly comprehend.
I can't help myself. I think the common question, what's the weirdest, but share some experience you had there that would be really interesting.
Well, here's one that bothered me. I remember we had a hummingbird shipment coming in, live hummingbird shipment. This was before the Wild Bird Conservation Act, which now basically prohibits it. And they used to ship them in crates, and one side of the crate would be mesh net, like a chicken mesh, and they'd have nails on the inside. They'd have little perches for the hummingbirds, but then they'd have a half an orange stuck on the nail. And so the hummingbird somehow would extract enough water or whatever to make the shipment, to make the flight. And I remember the rate of kill, and even with some of the citizens, the parrots that they'd ship across, the rate of death when you'd look at those crates, 30, 40, 50, 70, 80% dead, laying in the bottom. One of the major reasons why the Wild Bird Conservation Act is in existence today. The mortality was just ridiculous. We had all sorts of stuff. I had a wildlife inspector, a friend of mine, Michael Brown, if he's listening to this, he was doing a shell shipment. And they were just little bowls of shells that people use for, decoration and things of that nature. But there are some shells that are CITES Appendix 1, CITES Appendix 2 that we were looking for. Tridacna is some of those, some of these different things. Anyway, Mike Brown was checking them, and a lot of them have those little packets that help to keep them desiccated. Mm-hmm. You find it sometimes in boxes that you open up for shoes or something, those little packets okay. Turned out to be drugs.
Oh.
So, yeah, I mean, you just never know what you're going to get into. There were shipments that we would pop open, and they would be various decorations and things, and there'd be a human skull all decorated up. So, I mean, you just never know what you're going to get into. A lot of the things that you would have problems with as an inspector were permit issues, bogus permits. You'd have overage issues where maybe coming out of South America, they could have 100 boa constrictors, which are CITES. And you'd actually physically count, and there'd be 125 of them in there. So it's over their CITES permit. There was a lot of that type of stuff that went on. Same with the corals. You'd have living corals shipped in bags of water that were oxygenated. Going to the pet trade for people's aquariums. A lot of overages with that, or they'd have species that were not permitted. So obviously there'd be seizures there. And then as an inspector, you're trying to get these live corals. It doesn't do you a whole lot of good to seize them alive and then they're going to die. We'd be trying to get them to certain aquariums where they could keep them alive until everything got closed and squared away. So lots of different stuff going on. There was the leather trade was crazy. There were Hermes or Hermes, however they pronounce their name, very high-end leatherware. I seized a number of their handbags because they had crocodile leather and they declared it as alligator, or, they might declare it as caiman and it's crocodile. I mean, all these things. So as a wildlife inspector, you have to be able to identify. You really have to know your stuff. And it's not just one thing. It's everything that's coming and going. So it's a challenge.
When you didn't have, I don't know if you didn't have the internet, but certainly the internet wasn't as advanced, right?
No. It
Right.
I don't remember ever using the internet. We had books back then, which I know is a foreign concept to a
Yeah.
lot of younger generations. But yeah, we had lots of books. Lots
So a lot
of
more
ID books.
challenging to
Yes.
to gather that depth and breadth of knowledge. Now you just go to Dr. Google or AI or something, and you can
Dig it
at
up.
least get started.
Yes,
Right?
exactly.
Okay. And then you moved on to the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service after that. Is that right?
Wildlife inspector is with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife
it is.
Service.
Okay.
It's within the division. Now it's the Office of Law Enforcement. Back then it was within the Division of Law Enforcement. So you have the Fish and Wildlife Service as an umbrella, and then you have a bunch of offices and divisions underneath it.
Okay.
Refuges and realty and fisheries and private lands and other things. Law enforcement was one of those that was underneath the Fish and Wildlife Service umbrella. And so the inspectors and the agents are within the Division of Law Enforcement
Okay.
back then.
Did you shift to refuges?
From an inspector, I shifted to Division of Refuges
Okay.
as a refuge officer. And now they're called federal wildlife officers.
Okay. And what did that job entail?
That is, it's kind of a hybrid job between a game warden and a sheriff. They are domestic. They aren't doing the international stuff that agents and inspectors are doing. Their primary job, or one of their primary jobs, is protection of public on the Fish and Wildlife Service lands, which include refuges, WPAs, a number of different land holdings that the service manages on behalf of the American public. So that includes everything from trespass to hunting and fishing violations, boating violations, the whole gamut of things. It just depends on where they're at and what the public can do on those lands.
And then you said, I don't know if domestic, I think you meant not international,
Correct.
but conservation law enforcement have authorities similar to just a regular sheriff or police officer, do they not?
Within the Division of Refuges, they could pull you over for things that we commonly associate with what a sheriff might do out in a rural area. Yes, they can do things like that. Absolutely. They're a uniform division, just like the inspectors.
Okay.
They typically have marked vehicles with lights and the cage and the emblems on the side of the vehicles and stuff like that. So they definitely do wildlife conservation. They do Migratory Bird Treaty Act stuff. They do manage like deer on their refuge and things of that nature, or fish if they've got fish. If someone shoots an eagle on their property, on the Fish and Wildlife Service refuge or something like that, WPA, waterfowl production area, then obviously they look into that.
Okay. So I want to take maybe a little bit of pause in this stage of your career. If you've been paying attention to Delta, the most recent issue of our magazine, we have launched, there's a cover and then a feature story, a new initiative that Delta has embarked on called Restoring Our Refuges. Mm-hmm. It's largely a policy effort, but our chapters are also being involved at a local level with the local refuge or state wildlife management area that they identify as a public hunting grounds. But the whole concept behind this story was that there was a time when, I'm just going to pick some words here, they don't show up in that magazine article, but where the refuge system or state wildlife areas, I would say they were new and being managed with state-of-the-art technology. The infrastructure was new. The roads were new. If there were blinds that were built, they were new. And it was a thriving place for people to go hunting. Well managed, well staffed, well maintained. Fast forward to today, there have been budget diversions, staffing cuts, perhaps loss of revenue streams. But you fast forward to today, and a lot of, not all, but a lot of the public hunting area infrastructure is degraded, understaffed, undermanaged, and we hear all the time from our hunters, our members, that here's an area that the boards haven't been put in place for 5 years, the pump doesn't work, I can't even launch my boat. In other words, in an era where the number one barrier to entry for a new hunter or for an existing hunter to stay is, I don't have any place to go. The place I used to go is now developed, closed, whatever. So we're starting to hear from our members that something needs to be done. So restoring our refuges is Delta's effort to help shine the spotlight on public lands, restore revenue streams, restore staffing capacity. So I just want to, with that introduction or that background, Rich, describe the state or the mentality of the refuge system during your career focused on refuges or state area or those federal properties.
With the caveat that obviously I've been out of the game, but I'm speaking to it when I was in the game. Refuges has always been, at least when I was employed, they've been a flagship for the Fish and Wildlife Service. They're a legacy piece, if you will, because they are managing land. And I'm going to step off and then come back. The one thing that every animal needs, fur, fin, or feather, is they need habitat. And preferably in perpetuity habitat. Stuff that's going to last past your time, my time, our kids' time, our grandkids' time, still there. Habitat is something that without it, everything's doomed to fail.
Right.
And refuges, the Division of Refuges, that is the service's answer, I guess, for lack of a better term, to how we are trying to manage and get into that habitat game through the easement program, through the WPAs, through the refuges, and a number of other ways that we have been able to do that. That being said, because of the properties, you can't have one person managing 20 properties. It doesn't work. Once again, remember what I said earlier in this podcast. They're managing it on behalf of the American public. And it's their responsibility to make sure that if the American public is visiting or engaging in activities, that obviously they're going to be okay. They're not going to get into harm's way. So it takes people to take care of it. It takes staff to do this. And it takes materials and a lot of things to try to maintain this huge network of public lands. Refuges has always received the lion's share of the Fish and Wildlife Service budget. And a smaller division, like the Division of Law Enforcement, we are a very tiny, tiny piece of that pie. We don't have the numbers of people. We don't have the land management component like refuges has. So they've always had a big chunk of the pie, budget pie that the Fish and Wildlife Service has. Having said that, even though they've had a big chunk of the pie, as long as I was employed with the Fish and Wildlife Service, I have very close contact, still do today, with refuge folks. Just from networking and everything else. They've never had, in my existence, all that they need.
Sure.
They've never had all the people. It's probably not possible. And it gets above refuges. It gets above the Fish and Wildlife Service, and it gets political. And so everybody's fighting for that political dollar from Uncle Sam. And when you have other programs, not to get too far off of the rail here. But when you have other programs dealing with people, I won't get into, everyone knows what I'm talking about. Wildlife and conservation usually takes a back seat to other issues that arguably probably are more important. So refuges, just like every other division under the Fish and Wildlife Service, has always had to spread it as far as they can. And they've always had to partner and work with state, local, tribal, federal, international agencies to try to spread the money or get matching money or, whatever it takes to try to continue the mission of the Fish and Wildlife Service. So you're talking about, things deteriorating or not happening at all. Absolutely. Those things have happened, at least during my tenure. I received a few of those types of discussions from sports folks when I'd be out in the field or things of that nature, or even talking to my refuge buddies, behind the scenes. They were frustrated with it. But the bottom line is if you can't do it, you can't do it. It's right. Not that, they went and bought some sort of monster D8 cat or something like that, but they didn't take care of the blind. That's not the case. It's a matter of trying to prioritize, and if you try to please everybody, nobody gets pleased.
Right.
Not to say that the hunting segment or the hunting population is not important. It's very much important. The American public is important on our refuge lands, but a lot of times the dollar just can't spread that thinly.
Yeah. Yeah. I take great care when I start talking about this subject. A lot of people, I know a lot of people who work on refuges. I know the regional manager who has a territory and lands that they're in charge of managing. So I take great care to point them. Victim is the word. I don't like using that word victim, because a victim is someone who is in a situation and they can't do anything about it. Which leads me to say the word victim. So the district biologist, they do what they can. They have little ability to affect their situation other than to do what you're talking about there, spread the dollar thin. And sometimes it's not enough. Cracks don't get filled, both literal and figurative cracks. So, but what you're describing, it goes back to the 70s and 80s as well, just kind of that mentality of we never have enough. I think it's getting worse, but I think, like you said, conservation, hunting does tend to take a back seat, and changes with administrations and all things are trendy. So it's not a new concept then, I guess, what we're talking about.
Well, you don't need to answer this, but I'll just throw the question out. When's the last time you heard on the news that funding was not available to acquire a piece of land for a refuge track or something like that? You don't hear that on the news today. You hear the whole spectrum of other issues, and you don't hear about conservation. It's slowly but surely, my opinion, slowly but surely, conservation's taking a back seat further and further and further back. As my dad would say, it's a trail plowed under. Historical reference.
Yeah.
So we're losing ground. We're losing footage, and that's one of the reasons why I prefaced before I answered your question. The big thing that we need is habitat, and hopefully in perpetuity. And if we can't do it in perpetuity, do it as CRP or do it as plots or do it as something where at least you have something temporarily. It's better than nothing. But the only way to win this equation is habitat.
The Voice of the Duck Hunter, a podcast presented by Delta Waterfowl.